Welcome back to another interesting discussion on clarity from chaos. I'm your host, Dave Campbell. On this day in history in 1915, Italy declares war on Austria. In 1934, Bonnie and Clyde were shot to death in an ambush in Louisiana. In 1937, John D. Rockefeller passes away at the age of 97. And in 1970, the Beatles' Let It Be album jumped over initial sales by almost 4 million advanced orders. So that was pretty remarkable. Well, if you think you've heard it all, we are now claiming air turbulence is due to climate change. A couple of days ago, Singapore Airlines had an incident where they lost a passenger's life, and they're claiming climate change was the cause of the air turbulence. So if you haven't guessed it, the topic for this episode of Clarity from Chaos is climate change, and we are incredibly pleased to welcome back to Clarity Mr. Gregory Wrightstone, author of the best-selling book, Convenient Warming, How the Modest Warming and More CO2 are Benefiting Humanity. Greg is a geologist and the executive director of the CO2 Coalition. Welcome back, Greg.
Yeah, it's good to be back on with you. And it doesn't take just but a little bit of digging to find out that claim of climate change relation to air turbulence is just another hogwash, is what it is.
You know, it's becoming increasingly difficult for these guys to try to sell this stuff. Today I read what was the term? The Committee on Oversight and Accountability report on Biden's Green New Deal. And some of the things that jumped out at me, and we'll probably be talking about them, is the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to cost the American consumer taxpayer over $3 trillion over the next so many years. And all of the other impeded cost that's going to cost the taxpayer for this nonsense. EV, the whole report goes into the crash of the EV market, basically, and what's going on with that, to the point where they're offloading everything basically to China to build this stuff, because they can't build it here, and obviously they're paying 25 cents an hour to people in China to build automobiles so they can ship them over. And then what jumped out at me was the latest one with Newsom claiming his over budget in California was due to climate change.
Yeah, that one was, it's really quite comical, because he claimed that California's budget was impeded because it had too much rain over the last 12 months, and that the businesses couldn't pay their taxes on time or as much because they were impeded. Well, it was just a year ago, though, that he was claiming that climate change was causing the longest drought in thousands of years in California.
Right.
Everyone's forgotten about that. Now the drought has completely evaporated. Some excess rain actually is much, much better than a drought. So they should be thankful they're getting a lot of rain out there. So it's just completely, you look at it, no matter what happens, it's climate change. Too much snow, not enough snow. Too much rain, not enough rain. It's just crazy.
It's remarkable. I went out on the and I've played this for you before, the Science Moms website, and they're talking now about the destruction of places to go camping due to forest fires and such. But there's no mention of the fact that they've incredibly mismanaged the forests, not only in California but everywhere. And so now they're claiming climate change is causing forest fires and, destroying. And of course, it's just like COVID, Greg. They're bringing out the poor little children, and they can't go roast marshmallows and have their s'mores in their little campfires because climate change is ruining their environment.
And if you look, especially in the Western United States, Oregon, Washington, California, the big fires are on federally held, managed forests.
Yeah, it's all BLM land. Absolutely.
And so what they've done, if you look back when the first settlers arrived and they had the first photographs of the area there, what's remarkable is the areas that are now fully forested are at that time, 150 years ago, it was mostly open grasslands with stands of timber. And these fires would sweep through regularly, but they'd be grass fires. And what was also interesting, if you look closely at the trees, you'd find that the first limbs were maybe 15 or 20 feet off the ground. And that's because as these grass fires swept through, the lower limbs caught. But now what we have are, according to the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, there are 4 to 5 times too many trees per acre. And so what does that mean? That means that there's obviously, it's easy to understand that 4 to 5 times too many trees means more fuel for a fire, more intense fires, hotter fires. And what you don't also think about is now you've got 5 times as many trees competing for the same
for the sunlight, for the same water, for the same ground.
Water,
right.
Soil moisture. It adds to the aridity to these trees, so they go up in flames easier.
Right.
And also, since they stopped timbering, this was back in the 80s. Remember the spotted owl?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And so they stopped timbering. So now they've got too many trees. The undergrowth has grown up, and it leads to some terrible conflict.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they almost literally, and quite frankly, we're getting a lot of our lumber from overseas because they basically driven Weyerhaeuser and the other big lumber companies out of business over the spotted owl silliness. And, it's just like the oil production, right?
Yeah, but when we talk about fires in the West, a large percentage of these aren't really forest fires per se; they're grass fires.
Right,
and
they're the undergrowth. Yeah,
right? And it's a lot of it's due to what's called cheatgrass, which is a non-native grass and it's called cheatgrass because it grows out earlier than in the spring than the native grasses and takes over and dominates. And so these grasses can dry out. They have these warm, what are they called? The winds that come out.
The Santa Anas.
Santa Ana winds.
Right. Yeah.
Those come down. And they come rushing down the mountains, down towards the coast. And as the winds are coming down, they're heating up and drying out. And these Santa Ana winds, or further south, they're called Diablo winds. They can dry out grass in less than 2 hours. It could have been raining for 2 days ahead of time, and then these winds come through. And man, it's just these winds come through, high velocity winds, dry, hot,
low humidity, right?
Knocking over power lines, sparking right and left, and that's what drives a lot of these are grass fires. Some of the worst fires we know that you probably recall the names of were actually grass fires and not forest fires.
Right.
And so we have the same problem. And I've been talking a lot about this, Dave, in the eastern United States. We haven't seen it today, but most of the eastern United States is now covered with an invasive species that's called Japanese stiltgrass. And if you go into the mountains on all these ridges, forested areas, you'll see Japanese stiltgrass everywhere. And there will be, mark my words, there will be a drought in the eastern United States at some point. Might be not this year, next year. It might not even be for a decade. But when that happens, this stiltgrass is just ripe for the same kind of grass fires that we saw in the West. And so I hope it doesn't happen. But we're set up here, and I'm talking to you from Arlington, Virginia, and I'll be going up to my brother's mountain property in Pennsylvania this weekend. We'll be seeing. He's fought the stiltgrass hard on his property, his mountain property.
Yeah.
You'll think about it when it does happen 3 years from now. You're going, oh yeah, Greg Wrightstone told me that was going to happen.
No, and I'm south of Atlanta, Greg. So I see it all over the place. And what I find, because I've moved from the West and I moved from Colorado to here, and what I find comical is, if it doesn't rain for 2 or 3 days, we get fire watch warnings, on our alerts. And I'm going, 2 or 3 days? Are you kidding me? You're out west. it's like 2 or 3 months before you get a rain, and it's 2 or 3 days here, and all of a sudden we're in fire watch. But to your point, it doesn't take much to dry stuff out, even in this damp environment.
Right. And then, take a look at that too, what they're doing with these excessive regulations. We talk
Yeah,
about how much water we have in the East. Uh, we're blessed with lots of rivers, streams, a lot of pretty regular precipitation, not too much drought. But we're under the same regulations, water regulations, that
right.
California, Arizona, and Nevada. It's one size fits all regulation for them, and that's why you have to flush your toilet twice to get everything down. That's why you have low flow restrictors on your showers,
Yep.
because they think it's a one size fits all. If it's good for Nevada, it's good for you in Georgia, and it's good for me here in Virginia, and at
Well,
my new home in Florida.
yeah, it's the same silliness that we're seeing in this report that I mentioned earlier. It's the same silliness over gas ranges, refrigerators, the silly, and then the EPA, which is a complete unelected body, is imposing all of this stuff on everybody. And to your point, it's one size fits all. You can't have a gas stove, but that it doesn't really matter that every restaurant in the country is going to go under trying to replace these gas stoves. That doesn't seem to be any kind of a pause for these bureaucrats.
Yeah, and good luck finding one chef in a restaurant that would give up his natural gas fired
Oh, exactly.
stove
Yeah.
for an electric range. They don't.
Are you kidding?
Try and take that gas stove from my wife that's out here. Oh,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's just incredible. And then, yeah, I was reading in that report where LNG exports in this country are just excelling, and that we outproduce developing oil to the marketplace better than any other country in the world, including China, Russia, and everybody else. Saudi Arabia, they're all following, and that's all in the report. But what's in the report as well is the regulations that have been imposed are basically driving energy prices out the roof.
yeah. The good news for America is that most of the big recent increases in both natural gas, wet gas, and oil are on privately held properties. It's the shale gas revolution, the shale revolution, uh, Eagle Ford Shale in Texas, the natural gas in the
Right.
Marcellus Utica of the eastern United States. It's just almost, they're not limitless. Of course they're not. But we have many generations of
Right.
oil and gas. And it's also the rich wet gas that's really important
Right.
for petrochemical industry. We have so much of this, and almost all of it. It might be more than 98% is on privately held property. So Joe Biden can't really, in his administration, really, they don't set the terms for the leases there, but they have shut down leasing on federal properties,
Right.
Alaska particularly, and the Gulf of Mexico.
Right. What's interesting is I saw today the Dutch government is basically scrapping all of their climate change silliness. I mean, they're going back to acting like normal human beings and not being wrapped around all of this crap because they understand what the real economic impact has been to their country.
Yeah, no, you'll be interested. That's a good lead in. My new book, the title is A Very Convenient Warming, How Modest Warming and More CO2 Are Benefiting Humanity. I'm traveling over there. I'm leaving here June 12th to travel to Amsterdam, where I'm going on a book tour of the Netherlands. And
There you go.
that book is going to be published in Dutch. It's been translated, and we're going to be doing that book tour, releasing it there, traveling around Netherlands, which should be fascinating. I'll have 5 days there,
Right.
and it'll be so it's really cool to work with these people just as this is happening.
Yeah. Well, actually, and they even mentioned they're going to jump all over redeveloping and developing nuclear power as well to support their electrical grid system and everything. And they're already ordering, so the next big nuclear boom's going to be in the Netherlands. It looks like.
Well, it could be here. The CO2 Coalition, I'm the executive director of the CO2 Coalition. We have some really brainiac people, men and women, PhDs mainly. We have several nuclear physicists, and I was talking with one of our members the other day that's really big on modular reactors
Yep.
using spent fuel rods,
You
which
bet.
is basically waste. And he said that what you can do with these are, once they get the license approved for the first one, they can just start mass producing these, and we can use up the old fuel from the big nuclear reactors to fuel these. So
Right.
it's using electricity and getting rid of this nuclear
Well,
waste product.
yeah. Well, Harry Reid shut Yucca Mountain down. So all of these plants across the United States, all 93 of them, all of their spent fuel is sitting on site because they've got no place to send it. So these SMRs that you're talking about, these small modular reactors, utilizing that, and they're they're not unlimited, but they're like 10 to 15 years between refueling. And the silliness with, like, for example, the military, where they're talking about going electric and they're going this and they're going that with the military, you can literally take one of these SMRs and drop it in the middle of nowhere and power an army camp or whatever you need for whatever you need without, any kind of infrastructure, right? Except walk over and plug it into the box.
No, that'd be a great thing. And we support nuclear, common sense nuclear. The downside with this is we've been seeing the huge benefits that are accruing to the human condition, to humanity, and to our ecosystems from this increase of
in,
carbon
in
dioxide
CO2.
by burning fossil fuels.
Yeah.
And so I'm proud. I live a high carbon lifestyle, and I'm very proud of that. We have two SUVs. We heat our home with natural gas. We cook with natural gas. And when in the summer, I keep it comfortably cool. And in the winter, I keep it comfortably warm. And I sleep very well at night because I know there is no climate crisis.
Right. Well, it's interesting because I saw a graph and it completely escapes me, Greg, that showed that we were at perilously low CO2 levels. Even, to the point where everybody ought to be out in their backyard lighting a campfire and creating CO2 or whatever they can do to raise the level up, because the graph was, going down. And as you and I have discussed on previous shows, it's one of the cornerstones to life on this planet.
Yeah, that was probably, it's probably my graph that I created because
Okay.
it's been distributed widely. That was in my first book, which was Inconvenient Facts,
Right.
which is still selling very, very well. But that showed how carbon dioxide or CO2 levels have been going for the last 140 million years in just an almost linear decline,
Mm-hmm.
and approaches what I call the line of death, which is 150 parts per million. The average throughout Earth's history is 2,600 parts per million. And we nearly got there at the maximum of the last glacial, some 18,000 years ago. We got to 182. We were within a whisker of that 150, below which plant life can't survive.
Right.
And we believe, too, that really low levels in the high elevations, the CO2, there wasn't enough CO2 for plant life. And those higher elevation areas were probably denuded. And we see that reflected with huge dust storms. Probably, since there wasn't any more grass, trees during that period of time, that it was easy for the erosion to occur with windstorms and the like and runoff. And so we see that reflected in these the glacial. We can see it in glacial ice cores with these dust storms during that time. But thankfully, it started warming up and quite a bit. And now our CO2 levels are up over 400, a 50% increase. And that's, I always say, if plants could vote on this, they'd be raising their hand and going, "Hey,
Yay.
more CO2, more CO2. We want more CO2."
Gobble, 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 gobble.
Yeah, and they can't speak, so I speak for plant life and the
There you
bio.
go.
That's why I'm a plant spokesman, and so the more
There you go.
CO2, they love it.
There you go. So, with the coalition and everything, Greg, and I know you do a lot in the educational arena as well, trying to persuade the children not to listen to this nonsense and actually understand what's going on. Do you think people are starting to get their hands around? I know, the courts have kind of started booting some of the silliness out. It's just nonsense lawsuits and whatnot. I think one event just happened in Oregon where an activist there, oh my goodness, this and that, and the court said you're out of here. So do you think people are starting to get it?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I see more evidence every day, and I just talk to random people, just Uber drivers
Yeah,
or just people I travel a lot. Strike up conversation. What do you do? Well, you're either going to love me or hate me, but this is what I do. And people are fascinated. They're thirsty for this information that they've never heard. They
right.
just almost everybody is just thirsty for this, and we provide that information. So no, I'm very, very optimistic. Recent polling shows that the climate change is, if you give them 18 or 20 subjects, climate change is down at the bottom on just about every poll. Because
Yeah,
people know they look out, they see that forests are green, their lawn is green, everything's growing great, and food production is up. That's probably the greatest benefit of warming and more CO2 is crop production. And that's
right.
hard to argue against. And so we just actually, what they did was, it's hard, you can't contest and say more CO2 is not driving agricultural productivity. You can't argue against that because it's so obvious. And so what they have come out and said, well, yeah, they're growing more food, but it's less nutritious. And that's been the argument. And we've just published a paper 2 weeks ago on that subject, authored by Dr. Albert Gletzel from Paraguay and Dr. William Happer, emeritus professor at Princeton. And they took a look at it. It's a pretty detailed paper. If you go to our website and if you Google, we're going to the search bar, search for nutrition, and you'll be able to find it there. Or go to our publications, you can find it. And so it was a needed paper. It's a little technical, but it really pushes back against this notion of lowering nutrition.
So what they're saying now that say kernel, but a sweet corn is less nutritious now than it was 100 years ago. Is that what
Yes,
they're saying? Or a
and the
tomato?
reasoning there is a little, if you follow this, because corn. Let's just pick corn. Because corn is growing so much faster and bigger with more production,
Right.
it's depleting the soil from nitrogen in particular. And there's some truth to that. But by the same token, we've been there's this stuff called fertilizer.
I was going to say they've been injecting nitrogen into the soil ever since I
Right,
was a little kid.
right. Just monitor the farmers. Look, what do we need?
Yeah.
It used to be, in this paper, we did that. We took a thing that was called Liebig's barrel, and it's the law of the minimums, that plant growth is restricted by whatever the lowest denominator is that they need. For example, if it's nitrogen that's holding them back, then we need more nitrogen. In the past, CO2 was one of the limiting factors because it was so low. But now with increasing CO2, we're looking at nitrogen, some of these other nutrition, and that's easily fixed by just using nitrogen fertilizer, which we're doing anyhow. And two, think about it, nitrogen fertilizer, how is it created? We use fossil fuels, mainly natural gas, to create this. So this is a fossil fuel derived benefit that's aiding crop production. And we're
Right.
breaking in this new book. If you look, I look at the top 8 crops in the world in terms of tonnage and production by acre,
Right.
and all 8 of those, you can just the chart, it goes back 40 or 50 years. The chart's just breaking records year after year after year, and this is occurring for both the warmest countries like India are breaking great crop growth records, up to Norway, Sweden, Canada are all breaking these records because of modest warming and more CO. Modest warming means that the growing seasons are
A little
lengthening.
longer. Right.
And so we've got, since 1900, in the continental United States, we've increased crop the growing season by 2 weeks, more than 2 weeks actually. That's a good thing. That's a good thing. Killing frosts end earlier in the spring, arrive later in the fall.
Right.
And Dave, if you have an apple orchard in Georgia, what do you fear the most? Late spring killing frost,
Frost.
and that can
Yep.
just wipe you out for the year. And because of warming, that means you've a much lower risk of that occurring. And it's
Well,
so
if
it's
they
really
people, yeah, if people think back on, I think it was an early frost in Florida that killed the citrus plant. I can't remember if
late frost.
if it came early or came late. I can't remember, but
Well, an early frost, no, it would have been late frost.
late frost,
Yeah,
yeah, took basically that entire state's
yeah,
orange production to zero
yeah.
because of that late frost. You
Well,
know,
another segue here, Dave. We're talking about Florida and citrus.
yeah,
Uh, I'm going to brag on our team. You talked about our education
yeah.
work that we're doing. So we've set up. I've got a team of three ladies at the Florida Parent and Educators Association annual convention. It's the largest homeschooling convention in the world, and so we've got a double table there, double booth, and so we've got
You
our.
gonna get kicked out like you did the last time?
They love us. They love us.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
And we've got Dr. Sharon Camp, PhD in chemistry, and she's our senior education advisor. She spoke today at their luncheon, uh, huge luncheon, and she talked about the differences between critical thinking
Oh
and,
my.
and
Yeah.
scientific indoctrination that are being taught in our schools today. And so we just published today 2 more new books in our series. One of them was called The Big Bad Wolf, WOOF. It was about, it was about a Great Pyrenees, a
Ah,
dog,
there you go. Yeah,
a
yeah.
huge dog and he was worried that it was getting too warm.
Oh,
We use these stories to talk about and bring
sure.
science in. And the other one was The Mystery of the Night Raiders, where we used the scientific method. The 3 girls that lived on the tree farm had to try and figure out who or what got into their goat's food at night. And, was it aliens? Were it bears, raccoons? Was it a
Yep.
cougar? And so they used the scientific method to try and figure out. And so that's how we introduce
Oh, that's great.
children for this type of thing. And it's done in a anime manga style artwork it's just really, and the kids love it. They're entertained by it. And we've got a full-time artist on staff, uh, Tiago Hellinger, who lives in Brazil. And so we go back and forth. I don't speak Portuguese and he doesn't speak English.
You
But
figure it out though, right?
we get it done.
Yep. Yep. So what's your website? Where can people go get more information, Greg, about all of
So
this?
let's start with the education initiative.
Yeah.
We
Yep.
have an independent website. That's CO2learningcenter.com, CO2learningcenter.com. Our website is co2coalition.org, co2coalition.org. We've a lot of great resources there, a lot of great videos. We have a lot of commentaries. We're prolific putting out interesting, factual commentaries, and sign up for our newsletter. We don't bombard you with multiple newsletters a week. It's one a week. And I try and make sure that whenever we send something like that out, you open it up and you're going to look at it and you go, huh, I didn't know that. Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Nice.
I want you to like it and be entertained and learn a few things.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what we do. So we got a great staff, some of the top scientists in the world. We're unique. There's no one like the CO2 Coalition out there presenting the science, and we stay away from the politics as much as we can. With this subject matter, it's difficult, but we try and separate. We're not activists per se, although we've been involved in some lawsuits just providing the base science to these various lawsuits. In fact, we've got one we just supported with an affidavit in The Hague in the Netherlands, believe it or not. It was Shell versus Middeloo, and it was Shell Oil, the company, and we provided a lengthy scientific explanation of why the allegations of this lawsuit were just wrong. And again, we had top scientists in the world, Dr. Happer, Dr. Lenz, and Dr. Steve Koonin went together for the science behind this comment and the affidavit we prepared. And that's what we do.
Yeah. So when's the new book out?
It's out.
It's out? Okay. And you're going on a book signing tour in a couple of weeks?
Well, that book is the Dutch version.
Oh, okay.
That's the Dutch language version.
Oh, okay.
This book was just released in January of this year.
Oh, okay. Okay.
A very convenient warming.
A very convenient warming, and people can find it on Amazon,
sure.
Barnes and Noble, Books A Million, all of those places.
Or go to convenientwarming.com.
Or go to Convenient Warming and disregard all of the other silliness.
Right, that way you don't have to pay Jeff Bezos his blood money.
Exactly. Well, as always, Greg, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope to have you back on in the near future as things start to roll out a little bit more.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much.